We are and always will be a nation of immigrants.
This is my country, my damn country. Give me my country, you can keep the rest.
Bold men and women yearning for freedom and opportunity who leave their homelands and come to a new country to start their lives over.
We were strangers once too.
My country, my damn country. Give me my...
Hi everyone, this is We the Aliens podcast and I'm your host, Sasha Kapustina. Today on the podcast, I'm talking with Francis Cholle. Francis is a business consultant, author, and speaker. He is the founder of the Human Company and the Squircle Academy. As a consultant, he has worked with such companies as Siemens, Maybelline, Loreal, Ralph Loren, and many, many more. But the reason I wanted to chat with him are not his business credits, but the fact that I know that his path to becoming a business consultant has been quite unorthodox. You know how in life there are people who are going through it in a very straight and pointed way, as if they are on a railroad and they're just plowing through to their destination. And then there are people who are taking this windy trail through the hills with a lot of twists and turns and ups and downs. And you may have guessed that I am more of a second type. I've changed careers, I've changed countries, and I'm still looking. And I can't say that it's always comfortable. I do wish sometimes that the path would have been a bit straighter, but you get what you get. So I am always happy to meet a fellow windy trail walker. And I love to see people who make bold changes in their life, who try new things and who continue to discover themselves. And Francis is definitely one of these people. I hope you enjoy. Here's our conversation. Hi, Francis.
Hello, Sasha. How are you?
I'm great. It's so great to have you on the podcast. I am thrilled. I'm really excited. I'm excited for many reasons, but one of the reasons I am really excited is that I went through your new book and I realized that a lot of that approach that you're talking about has to do with adaptation. And adaptation is one of the big themes for me in this podcast, in the search that I am doing for our audience. So let's jump right into it. And first two questions are always, how long have you been in the States and where did you come here from?
I've been in the States for 25 years. Hard to believe. 25 years. I was arriving from Paris. I came here for a week.
You came here for?
A week.
Okay. So when did you first think about coming here for a week?
It just happened like this, you know. It was, I was ending a very intense, prolific, beautiful work experience in Paris as an art book publisher. And I was in my early 20s, so that was like a rare experience. And I was leading the publishing house, actually, with the son of the founder of the publishing house, who was not a man of publishing and not a man of business, but he was very gifted. He was a pediatric heart surgeon who changed career, and he was a very, very good publisher, but he didn't know really how to run the business. So I was hired to do that, and he gave me the opportunity to do both art book publishing and management and business. So we were not separate from the other. In a small business like this was important. So anyway, so I had a very intense, beautiful life between 24 and 28 in Paris and around the world as an art book publisher, publishing books and running a business. And I stopped for different reasons. I felt like that was the end of that chapter. I had to move on. And it was a big transition. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, would you like to come for a week to New York?" I said, "Yeah, of course. I love New York. I've always loved New York. I came to study in New York when I was a teenager. And a summer at Columbia University. So New York was like kind of a second home for me.
Did you ever consider moving to the US or leaving Paris?
Never. I had lived in Germany for a year and a half, but after my global career as an art book publisher at a very young age, I had traveled quite a bit already, like probably in already 40 or 50 countries at that age. And so traveling was really close to my way of life for work and for pleasure. And for me, at that age, I wanted to become a citizen of the world. That was very clear to me that France was too small. Mm-hmm. As much as I love the culture, the country, and my friends and my family, I felt I belonged somewhere else. And that was a vague idea. But the idea of being in New York for a year, that was the idea originally when I came for a week. Then it became a year, became 25 years. I just love the idea of living in New York for a year, like being in that international global city and taking a sabbatical, had time and money. So I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a year to actually get to know myself. That was the project. And be more connected with my body, with my emotions, with my feelings, and less in the head, less intellectual, less French, less left bank, publishing world, Paris, So,
what do you mean when you say less French?
Because French people love ideas, French people love principles and philosophy and all that political philosophy, all that stuff. So, you grow up developing a wealth of knowledge around literature, ideas, philosophy. At least that's how I grew up. Mm-hmm. When I was a child, we would not know a word. The first thing we'd say, well, let's pick up a dictionary and look it up. What's the etymology of the word? What does it mean? Da, da, da. So history. Okay, well, let's pick up a book of history. There was no internet at the time. So, or iPhone. So knowledge, knowing and what we call culture in France, like so important in the like Russia.
Russians are the same. Yeah.
Same,
I was going to say. Yeah.
Exactly.
I was going to say, that sounds, am I French?
Yeah. So that's what I know, So for me, the way I grew up is like from age 14, you have to accumulate good grades at school, because that's what's going to lead you to go into the good universities. Yeah. So, from age 14, you're very young. I remember at age 14, I was still playing with toys. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I was already writing essays on literature. So that, you live those two lives. But the junction is not so, it's very intellectual. You transition from childhood into developing your intellect, whether you're a scientist or politician or lawyer, whatever, it's going to be really about growing that mind. Yeah. And then I landed in the world of art book publishing, which was much more sensorial than purely text, which I loved, a great subject, art history. But still, I was in an office, writing books or helping write books. Yeah. So for me to go to acting was like, wow, okay, it's different. I had done sports, but then I wanted to do something creative. And then I thought, okay, I've done art books. It's 2-dimensional. I'm going to direct. It's 3-dimensional, live stage. And I love that. I love directing.
So you came to New York and with the idea, for a week, I guess, to hang out.
Yes, exactly. And on the plane, I had a project to open a school in Paris, to buy a very historical school of music, where famous composers had been teachers and musicians and performers. And I thought, I'm going to buy that school where I used to go myself to sing in a choir. And there was a friend banker who would bring the means to buy it. And I
was just going to say, at 28, you were going to buy a school.
But, I had done well in publishing. I had become a shareholder. So actually That's
very impressive.
Yeah. I mean, that was life, So I was fortunate in this way. But anyway, so we were thinking of doing this. And what I thought is, rather than creating a music school that would be about creating competitive musicians, I thought of creating a music school and performing arts school to develop that would be more human by the love of the arts and the practice of the arts, the performing arts. So that was my vision. And then when I was on the plane, I thought, Francis, you just complete something, give yourself a break and live that school rather than buying it and creating it and managing it. Just give yourself a break. So I went to an acting school. As a visitor, so to speak, I was a student, but everybody wanted to become what's his name, Al Pacino or Robert De Niro, and I was the only one who just had no aim, but just having a good time, and discovering myself. So that was a bit disconcerting. I remember that was like very different than my life in an office with assistants and business class tickets to make deals in Japan and all that stuff, or working with great intellectuals and experts in Paul Klee or Japanese footprints or whatever, or Renaissance times. And so then, I did this. I did that for a year. And then what happened is really what caught me by surprise, but not fully by surprise, but really what got my attention, my love, my passion, really aroused me was singing. And because I'd been singing for 7 years on and off in choir, and I loved singing in choir, that was unbelievable. I'd actually told myself one night after singing Saint John's Passion in Paris at La Sorbonne, I said to myself, if ever I leave that wonderful job I have, art book publishing, it will be to perform and be a singer. And I said that, probably with a glass of wine in my hand, so at night, at midnight. But then it happened. When I found myself in New York a few years later, I said to myself, you know what? You want to do this, do it. You have time, you have money.
Yeah.
This is unique. You have no commitments to anyone but to yourself. So go for it. So I started with 2 teachers at the same time. One who was a mezzo-soprano at the Metropolitan Opera, and the one was a teacher's college professor of voice at Columbia. And those were my 2 teachers at acting school. And I stayed with both of them. And 6 months later, I realized that neither of them were really inspiring me enough to keep going. And I went to another teacher, and that was a revelation. So I stayed with her for 8 years.
Wow.
So my 1-year sabbatical became a 10-year sabbatical.
So you sang professionally for 10 years?
No, I didn't sing professionally for 10 years. Far from this. I studied for many years. I became semi-professional. I joined an opera company called Di Capo. On the Upper East Side. I joined also another a company called Opera Amato, that was a very small, tiny company in New York. And so, I became a supernumerary at the Metropolitan Opera, meaning I was one of those slaves or ecclesiasts or, pedestrian in the streets of Paris in La Bohème, so people who don't sing, but create crowds and, and carry spears or whatever, just to learn. So I was on stage with Pavarotti, singing on stage, Mario in Tosca, and I was learning all these lines and all these music, and I was in the feel of it, and I just loved it. That was my life in New York, yeah. And then I went on tour in Le Nozze di Figaro. That was many years ago. Cast as Dr. Bartolo and as the gardener, very small roles. I mean, secondary role and very small role, but I had fun. I was on tour and professionally so, yeah.
That is so amazing. And that's one of those things about your life. And I know there's going to be more twists and turns coming before we get to today. But I want to ask you right there, how did you have the confidence to accept that thing coming at you?
I don't have any problem accepting things coming at me. What's harder is to sustain it. So, and what was difficult is one, it was a hell of a journey to get my voice out. And I'm going to say something which is useful for maybe the rest of our conversation later, but, singers or musicians buy their instrument. They go to a store and they buy a piano, a saxophone, whatever. But musicians, there's nothing to buy. It's in you already.
Yes.
So we're the one who gives birth to that instrument.
Yeah.
Or at least birth to its capacity to perform.
Yeah.
And the first step is to understand that instrument, be with it, listen to it, learn from it, for it to give its best.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's very different from a violinist, who will buy the best violin and will get the best sound. No, that's not the way it works. So it's a very vulnerable, harder than actors, honestly, because actors, to sing out of pitch is to sing out of pitch. That sucks. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Actors, yes. Good actors, less good actors, of course, but it's not the same as singing out of pitch.
Yeah, well, it gets close.
I know, but
as somebody who does editing, seeing terrible performance is kind of just at close cringe level.
I know. But yeah. I can
But
tell you.
I hear, yes,
Yeah,
for sure.
opera. It's
Opera.
perfection,
It's-
tempo,
yes.
rhythm, pitch, acting. Acting suffers a lot, but in opera. But no, it's really very difficult. So anyway, so I didn't really do great, but I had a great time. Okay, very challenged, very scared, very humbled, very overwhelmed. Like it's like I can tell you, it was like so difficult, but I stuck to it. And until after 8 years, I had a blow up with my teacher, who was a difficult one. But the master technique I was learning really is what got my interest. So I stayed with it. And then
So that's what pulled you through?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The ego aspect of artistry, which is necessary, was hard on me. I function much better where I carry something that's bigger than me than when it's about me.
Yes, I hear
that's
you.
my personality. That's all. Like, there's nothing I can do about that,
I think it's a European thing.
Well, I don't know. No? You have performers. You have performers around the world. So I think it's a personality thing. It's I love performing, but to build your career, your livelihood with you and your soul and your passion and your professionalism all in one place is very difficult. It was very difficult for me. Not something that was giving me the most energy. It was limited. I feel limited when it's about me, and in this very extreme way. It's just a matter. There's no judgment, just for me. What works for me, what doesn't work for me. Right. And so that was the second thing. And the third thing that was difficult for me is that as an opera singer, even if you can sing contemporary opera and everything, the thing you have to do is really learn the classics to perfection. So that means that you spend a lot of time on work of the past, and I'm very much about the future. So that was the second heavy weight for me, to carry around and to dedicate my life to, because there's no in between. Either you give it all, or you don't, for that kind of career. So, and I was giving it all, and I was not going very far, and I was not 200% inspired by some heavyweight built in the journey of an opera singer. So when it blew up with my teacher, I was left nowhere. I couldn't go back to her. I know she called me once on I saw that on my answering machine. I saw, I saw her number show up. I wasn't there, so I didn't pick up. She didn't leave a message. And I never had the inner impulse to call her, which was as devastating as it was freeing.
I can imagine. And you never spoke again?
Never.
Can I ask what the blow up was about?
About legato. Legato is your singing line, and I felt I was never able to have my legato in place and my technique there after 8 years. And I was very frustrated, very insecure, and very upset. And I told her things that were very demanding, which you don't do with somebody who has dedicated her life with a master. Well, you don't do it to the representative of a mastery technique. I don't know that she was a master. I know that the technique was mastery. I was certainly not a master student. And sometimes I had the feeling I was not with a master teacher. But that was my feeling at the time. I've not seen her in so long, and actually she passed, She was an amazing woman. As a pedagogue, as a teacher, I think the relationship was harder. And it was only for me. The whole studio had her, all the students had like their moments with her. She was a difficult woman. Anyway, but that was added to the difficulty for me. It's like, my life, I was really in her hands.
Yes, it's any kind of commitment to art is a huge commitment, very complicated. Yes. And then you also left France to do that.
And a career and success and friends who were doing super well, and I was going nowhere. It's like, hard to not compare. But then,
Oh, yes. I hear you very well.
It was very hard. Very, very hard. But my subject, my really beneath opera was Know Thyself. That was really the question I wanted to answer. And I knew that I had a gift for business, for leadership, for making money. And I didn't want to touch it again because I knew that I would succeed, most likely if I was staying in business, because, art book publishing is a sophisticated business,
Yes.
And we've been very successful. The company doubled size, became the most profitable publishing house. It was published in industry surveys, in reports that I read later. So we really had recognition. and that went great. So I knew I could do it. So it's reassuring, it's confidence building, and at the same time I said to myself, I'm not going to touch it because it's easy for me. And money and success can be really cover-ups to get to know your authentic self. And my main question was to get to know who I was and what was my place in the world and what would be meaningful to me. And that was a very unanswered question, but that was a very clear, that was an unanswered question, but that was a very vibrant question. In other words, I had no clue as to where I would end up, but the question was very alive.
That requires a lot of courage to sit in that place.
For 10 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time, yeah.
That is a long time. I've been in that place, and that's very, very difficult.
Yeah, that's why I have to be in New York. That's why I have to be away from home and peer pressure.
Before we jump to the next phase that starts after, I want to ask about your family. How did you grow up? Who were your parents and who are they? And
in Squircle, my new book, I start with a author's note. And in the author's note, I tell something that's actually, that it took me decades to understand. When I was 5-year-old, I had a dream, a recurring dream. And the dream was telling me, in the dream, there was a voice telling me, your dream world is the real world. And you will wake up to an illusory world, a world of illusion. I didn't know what to do with it. It was like a dream. There was not a nightmare, but there was a puzzling dream. There was like a koan, a Zen koan for a 5-year-old. Okay, so I had no clue. And my family, they were very kind people, well-intended people overall. We had a roof, we had an education, we had a very privileged life in many, many ways. A lot of access to nature, a life in Paris, education, da-da-da. Okay.
What did your parents do?
My mother was a professor in chemistry, and my father was an engineer in atomic energy and electronics and lots of different things. Yeah, so
it is a very intellectual family, definitely.
Yeah, intellectual and scientific, honest, integral. Who had emancipated 2 generations ago through education. So learning, studying was important.
Emancipated, what does that mean?
Socially, my great-grandparents, my great-grandfather, one of them, I mean, there were different parts of the family, but one layer of the family was, he was a policeman on a horse, you see what I mean? Which was already, he owned a horse, he had a uniform and everything. That was not poor, but that was not, on the top of society. And then my grandparents studied and successfully really reached the highest level of education in France, had big careers, professionals, worked for governments and stuff like that, were traveled the world, in the early 20th century. So, but they achieved that mostly through educating themselves. So my parents grew up with that same pattern, and we grew up with the same pattern. If you don't study, you'll regret it. Bottom line, that was the idea.
Yeah, same. I come from a very similar background.
Yeah.
Also scientists, and I'm the only weird one.
Yeah, exactly. So again,
still figuring it out.
Well, it took me a long time, for myself. So that's what I did. I had those dreams.
So you ran away.
Those dreams were actually going to take 40 years to be revealed.
So what did they reveal to?
After I stopped singing, studying with that teacher, and I couldn't replace her by any other teacher, although I tried, I left for India.
I was just going to ask, did you consider going back at that moment, going to France?
No, never. And I can explain to you why. That's a whole other question. But so I went to India. I went to India because I had studied yoga even before I started singing. But then I did a lot of yoga for my singing, breathing and relaxing and being present in the moment, all that stuff. And in India, they talk about Maya, the world of illusion. That what our senses perceive is not the essence of reality, it's a projection. And the only way you can really get to the truer reality is through giving up the senses and the attachment to what you see and perceive. And then you can get to a deeper level of consciousness, a deeper perception that's not linked to your sensorial experience. And that's called, Maya, the world of illusion. And then Hinduism, is looking for this higher consciousness. And yoga is the union between the individual consciousness and the universal consciousness. So that was the journey of a yogi, that was already imprinted or tattooed, in my psyche, in my dream world, when I was 5. And today, in my work, what I do is I help society, leaders, perceive reality, certainly through logic and facts, but also through intuition, which brings information beyond what makes sense. Like, you perceive things, you have perceptions, you have sensations, you have gut feelings, and they don't necessarily make sense, and they're sometimes embarrassing. And like the dream world, like you have dreams that don't make any sense, and so you have all these images in your dream world, but you have also those sensations in your awakened life, in your awakened world. And that information is what takes you from not knowing to knowing how to move through the complexity of life or moving through the unknown. And if you feed that muscle, then you can adapt much better and solve complex problems and so on and so forth.
And it takes so much. I mean, I don't know, maybe, and I'm sure there are people who who receive that information in a natural and easy way. Mm-hmm. I've always struggled with that trusting your gut thing, or even hearing my gut. And I have found that, and I'm still learning that. I have recognized a few years ago how important that is, but it's even just accepting and knowing it is one step, but then really, really knowing it and really accepting the information that you're being given. Mm-hmm. That's the main challenge.
Yeah.
What is well, we can jump to your method since we're at it. Does your method give any answer to that?
Of course. Yes. So maybe like a little preamble to the method. Why am I doing? Yes. Yeah. So as I'm really kind of lost, trying to find the next iteration of my life after this breakup in singing. Yeah. As I'm going through this, or in those years leading to this, I was very worried 20 years ago about the lack of sustainability of our models, thinking, I don't know how we're going to get through this one. It's like, I don't see a solution. Yeah. And I was like, but this doesn't make any sense, which of course was not something helping me finding my place in the world, because I felt like the world was like, on a...
falling apart.
Yeah. And also not only falling apart, but doing things exactly opposite to the direction where we should be looking into or looking at, So that was hard for me to find my place in a world I didn't really buy into. Not from an ideological standpoint, but much more from a cultural standpoint, from a way of humanity. You see what I mean? The way of humanity, let's put it this way. Yeah. And the big question I had is, how come we managed to go to the moon, a very sophisticated brain, technology, science, and we're unable to live in harmony with nature? Landfills, pollution in the ocean, air pollution, and so on and so forth. And I was thinking, like, no one that I know would ever put out a cigarette butt in their own bed. Yeah. And that's what we all do collectively. So we would never do it individually, and yet collectively that's what we do. Yeah. Nature, our cradle, we treat it as if it were, a landfill. Yeah. So a dumpster. So that was my question. And as I'm studying opera, after September 11, 2001, of course, things are hard. And I was like doing some temp work I was advising the founders of an advertising firm. That was a side job I was doing in parallel to doing my opera. I I ended up doing something for the CEO of Loreal, the former CEO, not the one today, the one before, Sir Lindsay Owen Jones, on how do you manage creative people. And that got me to think about what it means to be a manager, which I had been, at the head of a publishing house in Paris, and being an artist on stage, as an actor, as a singer, as a director of other actors, being really creative and wrestling with the creative process. So I had to really revisit all these different aspects of my life and analyze them and try to understand them to bring something for L'Oreal. And I realized, so that we're going to where we want to go.
Yeah.
The manager has to stabilize life, which is chaos, unpredictable chaos, okay, unpredictable circumstances called chaos, by rationalizing things. You have to limit things so that you can have a budget that you respect, a timeline that you will abide with or by, and so on and so forth. So they rationalize what's not rational life to make project move forward. And then you have creative people, he or she, who in the chaos of life orient themselves through instinct with their guts. And as they manage to go through chaos without controlling chaos, encounter newness within themselves.
Encounter what?
Newness, new things, new ideas. Yes. So either within themselves, something spurs out of their brain or their heart, or just notice things around themselves. Okay.
Yes.
So logical mind, manager, control, creative, instinct, flow.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, wow, but we need to bring those two together so that the business can operate and at the same time, new ideas can be born. So I created intuitive intelligence, the synergy between the rational mind and the instinctual aptitudes that we have. Mm-hmm. With the great awareness that instinct was actually dominated by the rational mind in business. You can create, but within budget. Mm-hmm. You have to create, but within timelines. And creative people complain that they're always under pressure rather than being understood for the golden geese, the one that really bring the goal to the organization, because without new ideas, there's no company or there's no renewal of the company. So I said, okay, well, this is my answer. This is my answer to the lack of sustainability of the world. Because since I'm 3, I'm given tools to be logical, analytical, but I've equated my life to the mastery of those tools.
Yes.
But we're more than logic. We're inspiration, imagination, aspiration, sensation, intuition. All these dimensions don't fit in logic. Mm-hmm. And instinct doesn't fit in logic. We've all fallen in love with people that we knew would be probably the hottest thing in our life, but probably the most difficult one as well, and maybe not a good relationship, but we still went for it because, you know what, it was just so fun. Okay. Yeah. And maybe it ended badly, but the experience was great and probably very transformative because we just went for really something that was meaningful to us in some ways. Like really, okay. So that's how you learn in life, through experience, and you don't measure all your, but exactly. But that's how you grow. That's how you learn, you don't measure experiences necessarily. You engage in experiences. Okay. So I thought, okay, well, we live in a system where instinct, the intelligence of nature in us, is being dominated by the logical mindset. Mm-hmm. And it represses instinctual aptitudes, if not negate or destroy what is our best connector to nature, best instrument to understand nature, best tool to live sustainably with nature. So I imagine 20 years ago, I said, okay, if we're able to bring back instinct in the way we look at situations and make decisions, we're bringing in the process nature that lives in me, instinct. I am of nature. I live with nature. I breathe air. I breathe the oxygen produced by the tree, and I send out CO2. So we are in this exchange of energy and physics and chemicals and everything. So
for sure we are. We forget about it.
Yeah, we are, absolutely.
And how do you convince a CEO to bring that in?
Okay. So you write a book. You test your instruments in real life. You see how they work. So as a craftsman who created my own instrument, I went into businesses and I had enough to to offer from previous experience. And I was testing instrument devices and models with them. And I saw results. It was amazing. And I got compliments and I was reviewed in papers and I wrote a book. It became a bestseller. That was Intuitive Intelligence, Another Path to Success. And then a friend picked up the book and said, oh, it's a great book. You should really have it translated in English. But then French people love ideas. American people love solutions. So I had to reinvent the book completely. And I came up with a model, the Intuitive Compass, a new GPS for a new world. So I created that model, which is kind of the antithetic model to the typical strategic management tool of Boston Consulting Group, of McKinsey, the greatest,
Is that what they do? I have no idea. I'm not in the business world at all. So they put everything in matrix. Everything is logical. Everything is based on strategy and analysis and facts. And of course, in my view, they miss out the greatest part of organizations, which is humans. Because humans, you cannot put humans in matrix. Tell that to Facebook.
Measure them. They're not equation. Well, I mean, whatever, I believe that if you want innovation, you need to retain what people have best to offer, which is the creativity and the agility. And that's our birth gift. That's nature in us. Okay. So that's what the Intuitive Compass does. It's really not about categorizing people. It's just showing them where the ability to thrive in disruption lives at the confluence of instinct. Okay. Our capacity to be forever creative and adaptive, and play, which is an activity where you are in the flow, you give up control, and you find your way of adapting, and you encounter newness. And the two together create one of the quadrants of my circle, my compass, which is rejuvenation, entrepreneurship, invention, everything that organizations need today to a certain degree, to a certain extent, or at least be aware of, nurture, protect, and encourage to a certain degree. So that's the model that I've developed. And so now I've done that for 15 years. My goal was to show that there is a way of thinking, a way of making decisions that could bring results, innovation, create value in business. Very tough world of black and white, no BS. And my goal was to bring it to Davos, the World Economic Forum, to show to the presidents of countries and global organizations there was another way to do it. And I brought that to the highest level of Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies, and conversation with CEOs. And I thought, when I met with them, we had great conversations, I realized that they were not necessarily the innovators, because they had to keep in place tens of billions of dollars of business accountable to Wall Street, a board of director, market competition, and so forth. So they were more, trying to step by step keep afloat, enormous ships. And they were not like speedboats that were very, maneuverable. So I said, okay, well, I'm knocking at the wrong door. It's not going to work. And that's when I encountered a former client on a project for women, and I realized that was the right crowd. That's how we met, Sacha. In those ateliers I was doing for women, I listened to women a lot, and I developed a model called Squircle that brings square and circle, also known as, but I don't want to stay on that, feminine and masculine energy. Okay, but I think to solve the gender conundrum, we have to give up all reference to men and women and all reference to feminine, masculine, so we can look at it's a universal language, universal energies that we all have in us, and have different preferences and inclinations at different moments of our lives or based on our personality. But understanding that the creative self circle lives today in a society where the structured self, the analytical mind, has taken power over circle. And that costs us our capacity to be inventive, innovative, agile, and sustainable.
To follow up on that, actually, I just realized, I brought up the example of Facebook, but it's actually a perfect example of that square that puts people in squares and in those boxes of analyzed data of what you are, who you are, and what you're going to listen to and what you're going to do, and traps you in that square.
I see your point.
So we need to add a circle to Facebook's philosophy to break up those echo chambers that they're creating.
Sure. Those big global organizations, even if they're not that old, I think Jeff Bezos was saying, talking about his own company, Amazon, which is like a giant. He said, we're too big now. We need to reinvent them ourselves because we're doomed to die. We're just too big. We're too big to be agile
you could start with paying people minimum wage. Like that would be a good start right there. Very easy reinvention, not too deep. But yes.
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, like, anyway, that's,
Amazon would never be invented in France.
I don't know. I cannot tell you that. Okay, I don't know.
I just
Maybe
know how much employees are protected.
But you see, we live in a global world, but I've lived in different countries and I've traveled extensively in others. And we keep comparing systems. And I think it's not a fair thing that we do to ourselves, because France has been a united kingdom for 1,000 years and America has found its unity
still struggling.
200, 250 years ago. So very different history, different way of building a country, a nation. It's 52 states. It's look the struggle that Europe has to be Europe, and that was started right after the Second World War, like in the 50s, 60s, 70 years ago. It's a process. So applying the way of thinking and living of Europeans who went through revolutions, who went through so many iterations of society, to what America is doing and struggling with in certain aspects, is not the best way of getting at what really a country is, could be, and could improve on to become. You have to respect the history of every country but when I say empathize, that's not respect, it's empathize, to really understand what the journey has been, to understand where the next step can be.
I think I know what you mean. I do want to kind of pick up on what we were talking about differences in history and differences in perception because of the history of the people and because of history of the countries that we come from, and that's something that that this podcast is touching on for me, and that's what I'm exploring, and it's about adapting and adjusting. So for you, as a Frenchman who came here as an adult, not as a child, you were a formed person. What was it that you saw here that attracted you?
I think the reason why, lots of people ask me the question because, I come from like Russia, a country with a long history, a deep culture, a rather equalitarian society, trying to really do good for people and providing the necessities in France, trying to provide a good life based on principles, which are fabulous values, liberty, equality, fraternity. I mean, who would not stand by those, So I have great...
And people actually keep that in heart? Of
course. That's why people get on the street all the time, because they feel like they're very careful that those are in place, It's who we are. That's very important. You're a dentist, you're a doctor, you have to leave your door open to anybody who knocks at your door. You don't ask for a credit card. That's your obligation. You don't market your services because you respect medicine as a birthright for everybody, as a mutual service that people will deliver to each other. It's help, organized help, with science and hospitals and dedications and very different in America. I was absolutely shocked when I was seeing, doctors advertising themselves on the subway of New York, To me, it was like, what? Like I felt like I was in a jungle, Yeah. People take an oath in France, that they will never market their services out of integrity. So, and the integrity is in science, the integrity is in service, the integrity is in your commitment to the health of the other person. It's like, it's serious. It's like giving your blood. You would never, ever, compromise on this. So that's what French society is made of. It's very serious. It's extremely serious. It's very morally. Yeah. But it's fabulous. And I'm very grateful for this education and for this sense of values and spine that you feel honorable to. And also the fact that people question this all the time. We question, as I said to you, like through knowledge and rhetoric. And so So it's a vibrant society from that perspective. It's an equalitarian society. It's an idealistic society. I love all of this.
Yeah.
And then comes the United States, where there is poverty, where there are more than 70% of the American people, the richest country in the world, was struggling paycheck to paycheck, and on and on. And so forget my French roots, so I don't judge it.
Yes.
Okay, and I don't make comparison because it's not comparable, actually. I come to America, I come to New York. I'd spent a whole summer in America when I was 16. I spent a whole summer in New York at Columbia University. I've been coming to New York and the States many times over for my work. I work in English as much as I work in French. I've watched TV shows. I've watched movies in English. I've drank Coca-Cola. I've worn jeans. I was born in a Judeo-Christian education, and I was born in a capitalist country. So you would think that coming to New York is like, coming to another city in France. Not at all. It was harder for me to come to the States and decide to live here, than to go and do business in Japan when I was a publisher.
So what was the hardest thing?
The hardest thing is that I, as a French person, evaluate everything according to a set of principles, therefore deduction and induction of behaviors and attitudes, whereas that's our legal system based on the Napoleon Code that rules every behavior in France. And in America, it's all about jurisprudence. So what matters is not the principle, but the freedom of every individual to create the life he or she wants, and making sure that freedom is protected. And yes, there is law, but every time there is law, there is jurisprudence. There's a negotiation that produces a new law. So every situation can be a negotiation, which for a French person is maddening, because where are my principles in this negotiation? So what I mean? Like, everything is negotiable. Everything can be put on the table and looked at as something that's malleable, when we French people have fought with our blood a revolution to create equality from a political standpoint, and has given a legal system that is really designed, and a social system that's designed to keep that equality in place. And in America, everything's negotiable, including equality.
As we know too well.
Too well. So it's like completely a world reversal.
Was there like a moment of rude awakening to finding out that not all the world functions according to those principles? Was there moments?
Yeah, there were moments. They were really harsh moments. I don't want to share them, but I can share that. So I go to my acting school. Somebody gives me a flyer to go to a seminar about getting to know yourself, like create whatever. So personal development workshop. So I go there, and then I got this guy who, teaches me over 2 days of 14 hours a day of seminars, until 6 o'clock in the morning, like, those crazy immersive workshops, the way that happens in France at the time, at least 25 years ago, didn't really exist as much. So, and then after he's convinced you that, you can recreate the life that you dream, blah, 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 then takes you as a client, and he becomes your life coach. And then he deals with traumatic aspects of your life, with not a proper care, and in the middle of that relationship that's now 2 or 3 years old, tens of thousands of dollars later, borrows money from you to buy his apartment in New York, negotiate the interest rates that you will lend him the money, and negotiate with you and say, but Francis, that would be much too high as an interest rate, and I'm paying the session, I'm in his office for him to help me to grow on some aspects of my personality, or I'm paying right now. I'm paying for session, and we're negotiating a loan that he has decided me to give him, money that I decided me to lend him for him to buy his apartment. This is jungle for a French person.
How did you get away from that person?
Well, I did get away, and I said to him, "I'm sorry." It's like that was very difficult. Yeah. Because of course there's a mind game, of course. And as you understood, when I moved to New York, I restructured my life. So that comes with a level of vulnerabilities and disorientation. I was fine with it, but that was part of my initiations. That was part of understanding what I liked about French society and French culture, and what I liked less, or what I had to be cognizant about in living in the United States. However, 25 years later, I'm still here because for me, in my personality, in what really animates me and the diverse aspects of who I am, the creativity, the freedom of being is what really animates me most. So I have not lost my Frenchness. I've not lost my values. I've not lost my principles. I just live in a social experiment called America, where I have much more freedom to undertake, much more freedom to be, even forget doing. And that to me is heavens on earth.
I think it's in a way comforting for me to hear your path, because I'm comparing my steps a little bit, and I'm going through some of the similar things. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, to have conversations with people who are further down the path, to support myself and other people who are on that path. And I have a very similar feeling about American way. It is that I come from Russia, which is a whole different story. And in Russia, there's this sense of nothing will ever change feeling. Just don't even bother.
Yeah, sure.
And America has this yes, we can thing. And yes, you can, as in you have the freedom and you can do it.
Yeah.
And it's the most beautiful thing. And
course.
It is funny. I don't know what was your experience looking at it from outside. Looking at it from Russia, it seemed naive and childish. Because yes, we can. So Russians look at it in a very cynical way. Who told you you can? What do you mean you can? Nothing will ever change. And when you come here and you live for a little bit and you breathe it in, and you realize that actually, if you believe it, that's what will happen. It will happen. Was there a moment for you of this transition from one to the other?
Yeah, because in France, I come from, a scientific family. My real work experience, where I give really myself to it, is art book publishing, intellectual, art history. Yeah. So it's serious. It's fact-based. It's based on intellect. It's based on fine intellect, refined intellect, shaped intellect, studied intellect, learned intellect. And then you come to America and it's all about creativity. And what is this thing about creativity? For us French people, at least 25 years ago, it was a scam. Mm-hmm. Creativity was this is not serious. It's just for people who don't have the capacity to think. You see what I mean? That was really that's not heavy and that judgmental. I have friends, world-renowned art book publisher, that would speak English, that would be capable of speaking English, that would go to the International Art Book Fair in Frankfurt, which is the big meeting of all bookmakers and publishers and everything in the world, once a year in October. And he would refuse to speak English at the book fair because he thought that English was just this inferior language. I mean, that's insane, no? But just to tell you, this complex of superiority and even forget the complex of superiority, but just this hierarchy. There's always a better level and there's always an inferior level. And of course, the goal when you're French is to get to the higher level. And there are academies and there are norms and there are, so it's always this comparison, which is so hard. And, French people tend to make you feel stupid more than feel intelligent. And America is the exact opposite. They make you feel stupid, not necessarily to put you down, although that's also part of the culture, but they make you feel like you're not enough so that you learn more so you can become more. So it's really the negative motivation versus the positive motivation of America. And then there's an art that was part of the courts of Louis XIV in Versailles, which was kind of the center of Europe, and Europe being the center of the world. So we're the center of the center. And the practice was to make fun of people at the courts. And because the king didn't only have friends, there were about 1,000 people living in Versailles, or a few thousands of people living in Versailles. There were lots of intrigues, political plots and everything. It's not like he had friends. And one of the way was, just to have this very curt sense of humor that was putting people down. And that's still part of social practice in France. And something that makes people smile when in America it would make
be
people
offended
cry.
and consider you
Being teary. Yeah, no, being teary. Forget that, being teary, because I know that's not a way to treat humans. You see what I mean? But that was a way to keep people at bay and to exert a form of power, because you never knew who would have the last word.
I can see that. And definitely it is very different. Different approach in American society. I remember when I came here for school, actually, and art school. And I don't know what your experience was. In my school, I felt that teachers were too encouraging. Again, coming from Russia, I know how teachers are in art schools. They will, it's kind of to the opposite, extreme of the spectrum. They will pound you out of wanting to do it unless you have this strength and commitment that art demands. Whereas here, again, I feel that it's partially connected to the commercial side of the education system here. They want to encourage you into staying in it and buying into it, that you can maybe do it. And they continue encouraging people where actually criticism would be demanded. Have you had a similar?
Of course. I mean, a very simple thing. American people meet to say, "Oh, I love your shirt," and then my answer is, "Oh, yeah, I do too." So I think they're having an objective commentary about my shirt. But no, it's just a way to engage and make you feel good and put you at ease. It took me years to understand this. It took me years to understand. It was just a nice, warm way to engage and make you feel good. Oh, I love your hair. Oh, you look so glowing today. And I said, yeah, I felt the same. I think it was an objective
the whole
conversation for years. But it's a pure empathy, pure making the other person feel good, pure.
Which, again,
warmth.
Coming from Russia, it took me a long time also to adjust to that. And Russians always suspect something. We don't expect any positive from outside. So we see what's coming. Where's the trick? Why are you saying this?
Several hundred years of Tsarism and decades of communism, of course, that creates a very skeptical, if not paranoid population. So we talked a little bit about the most attractive things about American culture. What are some of the things that you faced that you struggled with, and maybe you struggle to this day in this country? My Frenchness is what I struggled most with.
Is that your French way of avoiding this question?
No, not at all. No, it's my very real. I've learned to develop a lot of empathy for the world in general, for humanity, for mankind, including America, which is where I live, which is so different from my system, even 25 years later. And I even I still speak with a very heavy French accent because I would feel phony to adopt the American way of talking, which doesn't really represent in its rhythm, in its vocabulary, in its construct, the way I think and the way I engage the world, So I can do it. I can do it for a couple of sentences, but it doesn't stick. Because my Frenchness, the way my mind has been built, my heart has been shaped, remains French. So that's why I say my Frenchness, because, if I'm in America and I took the American nationality to vote for Obama in 2008, and I want to just make clear, it's not so much Republican or Democrat as much as it is, or it was, at the time, for the universal healing of a wounding of slavery, and, you're the inferior of, because we're all the inferior of something, of someone. So I thought that was the number one country from the economic standpoint and pop culture standpoint, having a president that represented the beginning of a healing of a 250-year-old story. There's another one that's even older, which is the Native American, but America hasn't dealt with it at all, unfortunately. Very sad. But anyway, the beginning of this was a very promising journey for mankind, I thought. So I thought that really was worth it for me to become American and create allegiance to this change in birthing.
I think it's beautiful that you made that choice because of that. I think a lot of immigrants relate to that feeling that when we come here and we don't necessarily have a voice to vote. I'm not a citizen still, but I volunteer, I donate, I'm active to the degree that I can be, even though I'm not a citizen. Because somebody told me that immigrants are patriots of America in a different way because it's a citizenship of choice, and it's a conscious for a lot of us. It's a conscious choice, and I think it's beautiful that you made that choice in this way.
That was my true deep motivation. And there were other motivations, such as I had lost my green card. And for 1 year, I had to go through a little room whenever I was arriving at JFK at the late time with 6-hour jet lag. And I still had to spend an hour. So it was like crazy. So that was one other motivation. The other one was for my nephews, if they wanted to come and study here or live here, they would have an American uncle that would make it easier for them. And another one was simply that being in business in America, I think American people appreciate when you actually get on board fully. And if you don't get on board fully, you don't really live fully the American journey. And they kind of look at you as a secondary item. And so I thought, okay, that's also another aspect of being part of American society and being able to express myself to the way I would like to express myself is to become American, So those were the other, but the main one was really supporting what I thought was an important humanitarian moment, in the history of humanity, a decisive moment of civilization. So,
and did it bring the change in the feeling of it for you, getting the citizenship? Did it change?
So then I did that at the town hall in City Hall in New York. The judge was a 6'3" Hong Kong Chinese, unusual, very tall, who told his story. It was very moving. His grandparents came. His parents were born here, went back to Hong Kong, came back. He felt very, very, very American. It was a beautiful story. And then there were people in the room for whom it was not a choice. It was an escape. It was a survival, So that was extremely moving. And I just realized how privileged, which, you know it, but then when you're really in the same room, going through the same process, of gratefulness, but for them, it was really life and death. It was huge, So that was a very important moment from that perspective. Then when I left City Hall and I walked through really downtown New York and then walked through Tribeca, it was very interesting. It was as if I was leaving a stage set, as if I were on the stage, and every building I was passing by was moving from being gray to whatever to becoming colorful. To really being in color. And it was like really I was leaving a set from a theater and I was entering in real life. It was like really physically, I could feel it in my body. I was leaving something that had been a creation of my own to entering something that was. And that was a very integrative moment because I came to America for my dream, for that creativity. No, for that my dream as a 5-year-old, to be able to integrate all the facets of who I am and be able to bring, I feel, to the world what was my personal life experience in a way that could hopefully help society and which is what I do with Squircle and the Novel World Foundation and the platform that I created, Squircle Academy, in addition to the consulting work I do with global leaders. Yeah.
And that was the moment. I that's still ahead for me, and I'm actually looking forward to applying for my citizenship at some point soon. One other question that I like to ask people: how is completely to the side of this? How is love life different here?
That's interesting. It was on my mind. So, love life. Marriage, wedding. Okay, so it changes obviously enormously recently. with what I call a gender explosion, you know. But I will say that there's not so many layers, but one layer is the fact that in France, we have a societal system that provides a foundation, a base for people for most of French people, get out of survival. Although it's getting harder and harder with economic crisis and recessions and immigration. But overall, at least you have a country that's committed to making sure that everybody's included in the prosperity, to the point that you reduce poverty as much as possible. At least that's a promise, that's the goal, that's the mission of society and government. In America, it's different. 25% of personal bankruptcies are related to health issues.
I know that my family would have been bankrupt if we moved here.
Okay. So, yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing is they even research bringing people with the same level of material well-being from the UK. And in that same group, some stayed in the UK, some moved to the United States, and lived in the United States and spent the rest of their lives. And with the same level of material well-being, the people who lived in the UK lived longer than the one who had moved to the US. Many factors, but the conclusion of the study was that American society brings us a level of anxiety because of the struggle for life that is not as present, or was not as present, at least at the time of the study, in Europe. So, love,
Yes.
within this context, plays out very differently. And one aspect I found is that, at least in my generation, so bring that back 30 years ago, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, for American women at the time, it was, and I think it's changed, marriage represented a certain level of security, especially for those who wanted to have babies and a family. I think self-actualization is, as it was for me when I was at their age, I came to America to self-actualize, to really know who I was and become myself. So, I think that generation is more into this than the dream of perfect marriage and perfect home and perfect babies. So that has shifted. But in my generation, at least, I felt, so, okay, that's one thing. The second thing is, I got married here to a woman, and I am with a male partner today because I'm bisexual myself, or at least that's how I see myself, and that's how I guess I would be called in the usual vocabulary, although I really hate those words of homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, and everything, because it's more fluid than this to me, and even if, whatever your sexuality is, it's sexuality. Why do we need to make compartments and whatever? So it's not even the fact that I am homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, as much as it is the naming of it that really bothers me. Okay, because it's just limiting rather than conducive of what makes me feel better. So anyway, so I got married to an American woman in America who was first generation here. She was an artist, so very independent in many ways, etc. And still, for her to get married was important. To me, it was not. But for her to get married meant a certain level of stability, because of the instability of American society, So even in a woman who's definitely going for her own path as an artist, which is not an easy path, in France, those category of people, artists and everything, marriage comes really late in the list. You see what I mean? So that's just a cultural difference. You see what I mean? That there is a need for security in America through marriage that taints relationship, love relationship, in a way that's different, I think, than in France.
And what about the dating life? Like finding your partner, how does that relate to? Because of course, people have all kinds of assumptions about French people, and
Well, I mean, dating is a complete, at least for me, was a complete foreign concept because I was very naive and romantic, and I was thinking like, you meet somebody, you fall in love, and that's it. You don't multiple date. You don't look like you don't have that multiple, scheduling and all that stuff and relationships and conversations
in
at
Russia,
the
it's
same
not
time.
acceptable.
And same for you?
You do one at a time.
Yeah. Yes, exactly, and then you give it your all, and it's like I mean, at least that's how I was. That's how I was, and very passionate and very singular, in that way, like 1% at a time. And so the organized way of going after romantic relationships through dating throughout generation, which I find fantastic. In France, at least when I grew up, when I was a kid, if you were 55 and divorced, okay. You'd better have good friends. You see what I mean? Because there was no reinvention of that was not in my family and the people I would see, whatever. First of all, most people were married. Divorcees were the exception, and by far. And there was no like second chance at living that big, once in a lifetime encounter with the one and only. So that was just like the very romantic picture. So for me to see people who just reinvent their love life at 60 or even 70, it's like, what? Like it feels like completely, it felt completely alien. Now I'm familiar with it. I'm okay with it.
Yes, you can. It turns out.
What? Yes, you can. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we're heading towards the end. Are there any lingering thoughts? Anything else you'd like to add about your experience of adaptation here?
Well, I would just say, I think for anybody who changes country, whether it's to America or America to Asia or Asia to South America, whatever, we all leave something behind that we need to create distance from, and this notion of adaptation is an incredible opportunity to dig deeper, into what matters, doesn't matter, what's different, what we like, what we don't like, what is my identity, what were my roots, what was my origin, my country of origin. So I think, it's a very satisfying journey, and it's somewhat dissatisfying because you become a hybrid. I'm no longer French. I don't think I will ever be fully American, and at the same time, I think it's the path of the future. I will end on one thing. I was once having dinner at friends, more like business friends, and I'm encountering this woman next to me, and they lived around the world, in Australia, in the United States. She's from the UK. The father is from France. The kids never lived in the UK. But the mother is from the UK. They were educated in English and never lived in the UK. And when I said, well, what do your children feel like? Which nationality they feel like? And they said, well, they feel British. So it was very interesting to me that their sense of identity from a nationality standpoint was not linked to having not grown on the territory, on the soil of the UK. Yeah. And I thought it was very interesting. And I think that's the way it should be, if possible, because frontiers,
they're not,
separate more than they unite. You see what I mean? And culture makes us unique to embrace more the universal.
I love that. And to me, again, one of the searches of this podcast is how to be an alien. And I love that you said that you will probably never become American. I definitely relate to that. And for me, that scared me. For a while, I realized at one point that the question was, does that mean that I will never belong? And it took a long time to acquire that kind of dual identity. And I think I'm still in the process.
But I think the amazing thing about America is that you can be American. I can be American and not feeling fully American. And that's part of being American, which is so fabulous, You could be an unfinished product, that's very French to think that you need to be that finished, polished French person. In America, you're just like, a process. You're just like in the making, you're work in progress. And I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So similar with for today. Tune in to episode 2 to hear more about Francis's company and his method based on merging intuition and logic. Please subscribe to We the Aliens podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a review. Follow us on social media. Share the show with a friend. And remember, we're here to stay. We'll find our way. Thank you for listening. Love you all. Peace.
My country, my damn country, and it don't mean a thing if it